Picture a spring morning in 1927, the air soft with the promise of summer, in a sleepy Michigan town called Bath. The sun spills over rolling fields, painting the wooden fences and modest farmhouses in hues of gold. Children, their shoes scuffed, from play, race along dirt paths toward the Bath Consolidated School, their voices a chorus of laughter and chatter that carries on the breeze. Mothers wave from porches, fathers trudge to barns, and the rhythm of rural life hums along, steady and familiar. This is a place where everyone knows your name, where trust is woven into the fabric of the community, where the schoolhouse stands as a beacon of hope for a brighter future. Now, hold that image in your mind, because in a single, shattering moment, it will be torn apart. Imagine the unthinkable. That same morning, May 18, 1927, erupting into chaos. Not a single gunshot rings out, yet the school collapses in a deafening roar, its walls and ceilings crumbling into a heap of rubble. 38 children, their bright futures snuffed out, lie dead alongside 6 adults, teachers, parents, neighbors, who tried to save them. The air, once sweet with spring, chokes with dust and the acrid stench of dynamite. This is the Bath School disaster, America's deadliest school massacre, a tragedy so horrifying it defies comprehension. And the man behind it? Not a shadowy outsider, not a stranger with a rifle, but Andrew Kehoe, a farmer, an electrician, a school board treasurer, a man who shook hands with neighbors and smiled at their children. You won't believe what happened that day, how one man could orchestrate such devastation without firing a bullet, how a community could be so blindsided, and why this catastrophe has been all but erased from the pages of history. How could a trusted neighbor, a man who wired the school's lights and balanced its books, turn into a monster capable of such destruction? What drove Andrew Kehoe to plant hundreds of pounds of dynamite beneath the very classrooms where children learn to read and write? Was it a single grievance, a tax hike, a lost election, that pushed him over the edge? Or did a deeper darkness fester in his mind, unseen by those who called him friend? And perhaps most hauntingly, why has this tragedy, which claimed 44 lives and shattered a town, faded into obscurity, overshadowed by other stories, rarely whispered beyond Bath's borders? These questions burn at the heart of this story, demanding answers that are as unsettling as they are elusive. Step into Bath Township, a speck on the map 20 miles northeast of Lansing, Michigan, where fewer than 300 souls lived in 1927. It's a place where life moves slowly, tied to the land and the seasons. Farmers like Kehoe rose with the sun, their hands calloused from plowing fields and mending fences. Children walked to school, their lunch pails swinging, dreaming of games at recess or lessons in the new consolidated school, a modern marvel that replaced scattered one-room schoolhouses. Built in 1922, the Bath Consolidated School was a point of pride, a symbol of progress funded by the community's taxes. But beneath its brick walls, a shadow was growing. A shadow cast by one man's resentment, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. Andrew Kehoe wasn't the villain you'd expect. He was 55, married, educated, a man who studied electrical engineering at Michigan State and worked as an electrician in St. Louis before settling in Bath. To some, he was a model citizen, thrifty, skilled, always ready to fix a neighbor's machinery. But others saw cracks in his facade, a temper that flared over small slights, a coldness that kept people at arm's length. He was a school board member, trusted with the community's funds, yet he railed against the very school he served, blaming its taxes for his financial woes. His farm, once thriving, faced foreclosure. His wife, Nellie, battled a chronic illness that drained their savings. And in his mind, a narrative took root. The community had wronged him, and they would pay. You might ask, how could no one see it coming? How could a man with access to dynamite, common as a plow in rural America, stockpile explosives without raising suspicion? Kehoe's electrical expertise and his role as a school handyman gave him free rein in the building's basement, where he wired his deadly trap over months. Neighbors noticed his quirks, his obsession with order, his cryptic complaints. But who could imagine a plan so monstrous? In a town where trust was currency, Kehoe's secrecy was his weapon. He bought dynamite in small batches, never enough to alarm. He worked alone, his motives locked in a mind that saw enemies where others saw neighbors. And what of the day itself? You'll be stunned by the scale of Kehoe's plan. It wasn't just the school he targeted. Before the first explosion, he set his own farm ablaze, murdering his wife and ensuring nothing of his life remained. His horses, hobbled with wire, burned in their stalls, his trees, girdled to die, his tools, scattered to fuel the flames. Then, at 8:45 a.m., the school's north wing detonated, killing dozens in an instant. As rescuers scrambled, Kehoe drove to the scene, his truck a rolling bomb packed with shrapnel. One final blast, triggered by the only bullet he fired, claimed more lives, including his own. The toll: 44 dead, 58 injured, a community broken. Why has this story slipped through the cracks of history? Days after the disaster, Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight stole the headlines, and Bath's tragedy faded. Unlike modern school shootings, it lacked the media frenzy of today's 24-hour news cycle. Its motives, taxes, rejection, financial ruin, seemed too mundane to explain such horror, leaving a void where answers should be. Yet the questions remain. How did Kehoe hide his darkness? What could have stopped him? And why do we forget tragedies that don't fit neat narratives? At Secrets Unleashed, we're driven to unearth these forgotten stories, to answer the questions that linger in the shadows. How did Kehoe pull off this massacre without a gun? His electrical skill and access to the school made it possible. What drove him? A toxic mix of grudges and desperation distilled into a single devastating act. Why was it forgotten? Timing, media, and the human need to move on buried it. Stay with us as we unravel the Bath School disaster, a story of trust betrayed, lives lost, and lessons that echo across decades. This is Secrets Unleashed, where we dig deep into the past to reveal truths that haunt and teach. You'll find answers, but they'll leave you questioning, because some secrets, once unleashed, change how you see the world. On the morning of May 18, 1927, in the quiet farming community of Bath Township, Michigan, a series of explosions tore through the Bath Consolidated School, reducing its proud brick walls to rubble. When the dust settled, 44 lives were lost, 38 of them children, aged 7 to 12, their futures stolen in an instant, alongside 6 adults who were teachers, parents, and neighbors caught in the blast. At least 58 others were injured, some bearing physical and emotional scars that would never fade. This was no random act of violence, no storm of bullets from an outsider's gun. It was the Bath School disaster, America's deadliest school massacre, orchestrated by a man who walked among the community as one of its own, Andrew Philip Kehoe. A farmer, an electrician, a school board treasurer, Kehoe was a respected figure, known for his thrift and mechanical skill. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, he harbored a deadly grudge, a festering rage that he channeled into a meticulously planned act of destruction using dynamite and his expertise in electrical wiring. The only bullet fired that day was the one Kehoe used to end his own life, a final punctuation in a rampage that needed no firearms to wreak havoc. The nation was stunned, but within days, this tragedy began to fade from memory, overshadowed by other events, its story buried like the debris of the school itself. Why did Kehoe do it? How could a trusted neighbor commit such an atrocity? And why has this catastrophe, one of the most devastating in American history, been all but forgotten? This is not just a true crime story to be consumed and set aside. The Bath School disaster is a profound meditation on the ethics of secrecy, the fragility of trust, and the devastating human toll of unchecked vengeance. It forces us to grapple with questions that resonate nearly a century later. How could a man so deeply embedded in his community hide such darkness? What drives someone to target the innocent? Children laughing in classrooms, teachers shaping young minds in a bid to settle personal scores? Why has this tragedy, which claimed 44 lives and shattered a town, been relegated to a footnote in history, its lessons lost to time? These questions, raised in our opening hook, are the threads that weave this narrative together, and we will unravel them, delivering answers that are as unsettling as they are illuminating. Crafted in the slow-burn, character-driven style of Operation Greylord, with its focus on the human stories behind the crime, and infused with the dramatic, skeptical tone of SL1, which probes the gaps between what we see and what lies beneath. This account is designed for true crime and history enthusiasts who seek depth, complexity, and truth over sensationalism. Welcome to Secrets Unleashed, where we dig into the forgotten corners of the past, giving voice to the lives forever altered by this tragedy and uncovering the lessons they leave behind. To understand the Bath School disaster, we must first step into Bath Township, a rural hamlet of fewer than 300 souls, nestled 20 miles northeast of Lansing, Michigan, in the spring of 1927. This was a place where life moved at the pace of the seasons, where neighbors shared tools and stories over fence lines, where church suppers and barn raisings knit the community together. The Bath Consolidated School, opened in 1922, was the town's pride, a modern two-story brick building that replaced scattered one-room schoolhouses, promising better education for the region's children. It was a symbol of progress, a beacon of hope for a community striving to keep pace with a changing world. But progress came with a price. Funded by property taxes, the school stirred resentment among farmers already grappling with the economic hardships of the 1920s, a decade when crop prices plummeted and debts mounted. For one man, Andrew Kehoe, those taxes were not just a burden. They were a personal betrayal, a spark that ignited a firestorm of rage. Andrew Kehoe was no caricature of a villain. Born on February 1, 1872, in Tecumseh, Michigan, he was one of 13 children in a farming family, a bright and ambitious young man who studied electrical engineering at Michigan State College and worked as an electrician in St. Louis. A head injury in his 20s, which left him comatose for weeks, seemed to mark a shift in his character, turning a once charming individual into one prone to irritability and isolation. In 1912, he married Nellie Price, and in 1919, they settled on a 185-acre farm in Bath Township. To some, Kehoe was a model citizen, meticulous, resourceful, always ready to fix a neighbor's tractor or wire a barn. But others saw a darker side, a temper that flared over minor slights, like the time he beat a horse to death for laziness, or the whispers linking him to his stepmother's suspicious death in a 1911 fire. Elected school board treasurer in 1924, Kehoe held a position of trust, overseeing the school's finances and even performing maintenance tasks. Yet he clashed repeatedly with Superintendent Emery Hike over spending, railing against the taxes that funded the school. By 1927, with his farm facing foreclosure and Nellie's chronic illness, likely tuberculosis, draining their savings, Kehoe's world was crumbling. In his mind, the school and the community that supported it became the source of his woes, a target for his growing resentment. The method of Kehoe's madness was as chilling as its execution. In rural America, dynamite and pyritol, a World War I surplus explosive, were as common as farm tools, used to clear stumps or blast irrigation ditches. Kehoe, with his electrical expertise, acquired these materials in small, unremarkable purchases, carefully avoiding suspicion. As a school handyman, he had unfettered access to the school's basement, where he spent months wiring hundreds of pounds of explosives, his work disguised as routine maintenance. This secrecy lies at the heart of the story's ethical weight. How could a community so rooted in trust fail to see a man unraveling? How did Kehoe's grievances over taxes, a lost election for township clerk in 1926, personal failures, fester into a plan to destroy the very children he saw each day? These questions, posed in our hook, drive the narrative forward, and the answers reveal a man who saw himself not as a monster, but as a victim seeking retribution. His final act, stenciling "Criminals are made, not born" on a sign at his farm, suggests a chilling belief that his actions were justified, a response to a world he believed had wronged him. The fading of this tragedy from history is as perplexing as the crime itself. In 1927, the disaster dominated headlines, with newspapers from New York to Chicago calling Kehoe a madman and fiend. Thousands flocked to Bath, some to mourn, others to gawk, as the nation grappled with the horror. Yet just days later, Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight captured the world's attention, and Bath's tragedy began to slip away. Unlike modern school shootings, which are amplified by 24-hour news cycles and social media, the Bath School disaster lacked the cultural scaffolding to endure. Its motives, tax disputes, personal grudges, financial ruin, seemed too mundane to explain the slaughter of 38 children, leaving a narrative void that resisted easy answers. Why do some tragedies, like Columbine or Sandy Hook, become cultural touchstones, while Bath fades into obscurity? The answer, explored in this narrative, lies in timing, media priorities, and the human tendency to shy away from stories that defy simple explanation. This account will resolve the Hook's questions. Kehoe's electrical skill and school access enabled his plan. His rage stemmed from a toxic mix of financial ruin, rejection, and perceived injustice. And the tragedy's obscurity reflects a nation eager to move on from an uncomfortable truth. Our approach, inspired by Operation Greylord, is character-driven, delving into the lives of Kehoe, his victims, and the community they shared. We explore Kehoe's contradictions, a skilled electrician turned mass murderer, a neighbor who helped with chores yet planned destruction. We honor the courage of Superintendent Emery Hike, who stood up to Kehoe's bullying and died leading the rescue effort, and the resilience of survivors like teacher Bernice Sterling, who carried the trauma for decades. We remember the children, like 8-year-old F. Robert Cochran, whose lives were cut short. Infused with SL1's skeptical tone, we question how Kehoe's actions went unnoticed, probing the gap between perception and reality. Was he a calculating killer, or a man broken by circumstance? Did the community's trust blind it to danger? These answers, woven through the narrative, resolve the Hook's questions while raising new ones about trust, vigilance, and memory. For true crime and history fans, the Bath School disaster is a story of human complexity, where motives blur and the truth unsettles. It challenges us to consider how we balance trust with caution, how we recognize the warning signs of rage, and how we ensure tragedies like Bath are remembered, not forgotten. Join Secrets Unleashed as we unravel the lives caught in this catastrophe, from Kehoe's calculated destruction to the survivors who rebuilt in its wake. This is a story of betrayal, loss, and the enduring question of what makes a man capable of such evil. As we move forward, we'll answer the Hook's questions: how Kehoe orchestrated his massacre, what fueled his rage, and why history let this tragedy slip away, while uncovering the secrets that shape our understanding of the past. Stay with us, because at Secrets Unleashed, we don't just tell stories, we reveal the truths that linger in their shadows. To grasp the full weight of the Bath School disaster, we must step into the world of Bath Township, Michigan, in the 1920s, a rural hamlet of fewer than 300 souls, nestled 20 miles northeast of Lansing in Clinton County. This was a community rooted in the rhythms of the land, where life revolved around the cycles of planting and harvesting. Fields of corn, wheat, and oats stretched across the gently rolling landscape, framed by weathered wooden fences and dotted with modest farmhouses, their porches serving as gathering spots for neighbors to share stories over steaming mugs of coffee or homemade cider. Barns, sturdy but worn by years of harsh Michigan winters, housed livestock that lowed softly in the early morning mist. The church, its steeple piercing the sky, stood as the heart of communal life, hosting Sunday services, weddings, and potluck, suppers that knit families together through shared faith and fellowship. Children trudged along dirt paths to school, their lunch pails swinging, their chatter about recess games or classroom lessons mingling with the rustle of leaves or the distant clatter of a tractor. Bath Township was a place of intimacy, where trust was not just a value but a necessity, where a neighbor's handshake was as binding as a contract, and secrets, if they existed, were buried deep beneath layers of familiarity and routine. 1920s, however, brought winds of change to rural America, and Bath Township was not immune. The decade followed the cataclysm of World War I, which had reshaped global economies and left American farmers grappling with new realities. During the war, soaring demand for crops had brought prosperity to rural communities, with farmers like those in Bath reaping the benefits of high prices for grain and produce. But by the early 1920s, European agriculture had recovered, flooding markets with surplus crops and driving down prices. Farmers who had borrowed heavily to expand during the war years now faced shrinking incomes, mounting debts, and the looming threat of foreclosure. In Bath, this economic strain was compounded by a push for modernization that swept through rural America. Across the country, communities were moving away from one-room schoolhouses, Small, drafty buildings where a single teacher instructed children of all ages in cramped quarters toward consolidated schools. These larger institutions promised state-of-the-art facilities, professionally trained teachers, and a standardized curriculum, aligning rural education with the demands of an industrializing nation. But such progress required funding, often through increased property taxes, which hit farmers hard in an already precarious economy. In 1922, Bath Township unveiled its crowning achievement, the Bath Consolidated School, a modern two-story brick building that replaced the region's scattered one-room schoolhouses. To the community, it was a beacon of progress, a symbol of their commitment to giving their children a brighter future. The school's classrooms buzzed with lessons in reading, arithmetic, history, and geography, its blackboards filled with chalked equations and handwritten poems. The playground was a hub of youthful energy, where children played tag, tossed balls, or whispered dreams of becoming teachers, doctors, or farmers themselves. Parents saw the school as a promise, a place where their sons and daughters could rise above the hardships of rural life and seize opportunities their parents never had. The building itself, with its solid brick walls and large windows, stood in stark contrast to the rough-hewn schoolhouses of the past, embodying the community's aspirations. Yet, not everyone shared this optimism. The property taxes that funded the school, approved by a community vote in 1921, stirred resentment among some farmers, who saw their already strained budgets stretched thinner by the cost of progress. For one man, Andrew Philip Kehoe, these taxes were not just a financial burden, but a personal betrayal, a spark that would ignite a catastrophic chain of events. Andrew Kehoe was born on February 1, 1872, in Tecumseh, Michigan, one of 13 children in a hard-working farming family. From a young age, he stood out for his intelligence and ambition, qualities that set him apart in a world where physical labor often overshadowed academic pursuits. He pursued electrical engineering at Michigan State College, a rare achievement for a farmer's son in the late 19th century, and later worked as an electrician in St. Louis, mastering the intricacies of wires, circuits, and machinery. This technical expertise made him a valuable figure in rural communities, where mechanical know-how was prized for its practicality. In his early years, Kehoe was described as charming, with a quick wit and a knack for solving problems, whether it was repairing a neighbor's plow or wiring a barn for electric light. Neighbors in Bath would later recall his ability to fix anything mechanical, from a bulky tractor to a flickering lamp, earning him respect in a world where self-reliance was paramount. But a pivotal moment in his 20s cast a long shadow over his life. While working in St. Louis, Kehoe suffered a severe head injury. Some accounts suggest a fall from a ladder, others a blow to the head, that left him comatose for weeks. When he awoke, something had shifted. The once affable young man became prone to irritability, his temper flaring over minor slights, his demeanor tinged with a coldness that unsettled those around him. In an era with limited understanding of brain trauma, no formal diagnosis was made. But neighbors in Bath would later note his volatility, a latent instability that simmered beneath a polished exterior. In 1912, Kehoe married Nellie Price, a woman from a respected Michigan family. Their marriage, at first, seemed unremarkable, a practical union suited to the demands of rural life. In 1919, they purchased a 185-acre farm in Bath Township, a sprawling property that promised prosperity, but required relentless effort. Kehoe approached farming with the same precision he applied to his electrical work, maintaining his fields with meticulous care and keeping his tools in pristine condition. Neighbors admired his thrift. He was known to sand and oil even the smallest equipment to extend its life. But they also noted his quirks. He was obsessive about order, intolerant of inefficiency, and quick to anger. One chilling incident stood out when a horse failed to pull its load. Kehoe beat it to death in a fit of rage, an act that left onlookers stunned and uneasy. Whispers also circulated about a darker chapter from his past. In 1911, his stepmother died in Tecumseh when an oil stove exploded, burning her alive. Though never proven, some suspected Kehoe's involvement, noting his familiarity with flammable materials and his presence at the scene. These stories, unconfirmed but persistent, painted a picture of a man capable of violence, even if it lurked beneath a carefully maintained facade. The economic pressures of the 1920s hit Kehoe's farm hard. Falling crop prices eroded his income, and Nellie's chronic illness, likely tuberculosis, added the burden of mounting medical bills, which drained their savings. The Bath Consolidated School, with its tax demands, became a focal point for his growing frustration. In 1924, Kehoe was elected school board treasurer, a role that gave him oversight of the school's finances and intimate access to its inner workings. He also served as a handyman, often seen tinkering in the school's basement, fixing lights or repairing equipment. To the community, this was a sign of dedication. In hindsight, it was an opportunity for something far more sinister. Kehoe clashed repeatedly with Superintendent Emery Hike, a principled World War I veteran who championed the school's mission to provide a modern education. Kehoe accused Huyck of mismanagement, railing against the taxes that funded the school's upkeep. His bitterness deepened in 1926 when he ran for township clerk and lost, a public humiliation that stung his pride. By 1927, with his farm facing foreclosure and Nellie's health deteriorating, Kehoe's world was unraveling. In his mind, a dangerous narrative took root. The school and the community that supported it were responsible for his downfall, a betrayal that demanded retribution. Kehoe's access to explosives was unremarkable in the context of rural life. Dynamite and pyritol, a World War I surplus explosive, were common tools, used by farmers to blast stumps, clear rocks, or dig irrigation ditches. With his electrical expertise, Kehoe purchased these materials in small, carefully spaced orders, avoiding suspicion. His role as a school handyman gave him unfettered access to the building's basement, where he could work undisturbed, wiring explosives with the precision of an engineer. This combination of access, skill, and secrecy set the stage for a meticulously planned horror. Yet, the question lingers: how could a community so close-knit miss the signs? Neighbors noted Kehoe's quirks, his obsession with order, his cryptic complaints about taxes. But in a town built on trust, no one imagined a neighbor could harbor such malice. His position on the school board, meant to serve the community, became a tool for betrayal. The Bath School disaster, then, is not just the story of one man's rage, but a collision of forces: economic hardship, personal failure, and the unintended consequences of progress. The Consolidated School, a symbol of hope, became a lightning rod for resentment. Kehoe's electrical skills, once a source of pride, became a weapon. And the community's trust, its greatest strength, became its vulnerability. This context lays the foundation for the tragedy that unfolded on May 18, 1927, when Kehoe's carefully laid plans erupted, claiming 44 lives and shattering a town. As we move forward, we'll explore how he executed his plan, what drove him to such extremes, and why this catastrophe faded from history, revealing a tragedy as complex as it is heartbreaking. The morning of May 18, 1927, dawned warm and clear. In Bath Township, Michigan, a small farming community where the rhythms of rural life unfolded with quiet predictability, children streamed into the Bath Consolidated School, their voices filling the air with laughter and chatter as they settled into classrooms for another day of lessons. The two-story brick building, a symbol of progress since its opening in 1922, buzzed with the energy of young minds, students aged 7 to 12 scribbling arithmetic problems, reciting poems, or stealing glances at the playground beyond the windows. Teachers like Bernice Sterling, a second-grade instructor, prepared their lessons, unaware that beneath their feet, in the school's basement, Andrew Philip Kehoe had spent months wiring over 500 pounds of dynamite and pyritol, a World War I surplus explosive. His plan, a meticulously crafted act of vengeance, was about to unfold, transforming a peaceful morning into a nightmare that would scar Bath Township forever. Kehoe's rampage began not at the school, but at his 185-acre farm, a mile away, where the seeds of his destruction had been sown in secrecy. Sometime between May 16th and May 18th, investigators could never pinpoint the exact day Kehoe murdered his wife, Nellie Price Kehoe. The details of her death are shrouded in horror. She was bludgeoned, likely with a blunt object, and her body was left amid the ruins of their farm, which Kehoe had rigged with firebombs to ensure total destruction. He had planned every detail with chilling precision. He hobbled his horses with wire, trapping them in the barn to burn alive, their pained cries swallowed by the flames. He girdled his fruit trees, slicing their bark to ensure they would wither and die. Lumber and debris were scattered across the property to fuel the inferno, a deliberate act to erase every trace of his life. This was no impulsive outburst, but a calculated act of spite, a prelude to the larger horror Kehoe had planned. By the time the flames consumed his farm, Kehoe was already on his way to the school, his Ford truck loaded with a deadly cargo, dynamite, pyritol, and shrapnel, including nails and scrap metal, designed to maximize destruction. At 8:45 a.m., as the school day began, the first explosion ripped through the north wing of the Bath Consolidated School. The force was catastrophic, a deafening roar that shook the ground and sent a plume of dust and smoke into the sky. The dynamite, wired with Kehoe's electrical expertise, collapsed walls and ceilings in an instant, crushing 38 people, mostly children aged 7 to 12, beneath tons of brick and plaster. The victims included students like 8-year-old F. Robert Cochran and J. Emerson Medcoff, whose lives were snuffed out as they sat at their desks, unaware of the danger below. Teachers, too, were caught in the blast, their efforts to protect their students cut short by the sudden collapse. The sound of the explosion echoed for miles, a thunderclap that froze farmers in their fields and mothers on their porches. Within moments, the quiet of Bath Township gave way to chaos, as parents, neighbors, and passers-by raced toward the school, their hearts pounding with dread. Superintendent Emery Huyck, a 33-year-old World War I veteran and a respected figure in the community, was among the first to arrive. Known for his courage and dedication, Huyck had clashed with Kehoe over school board matters, unaware that those disputes had fueled a deadly vendetta. As he reached the school, he found a scene of unimaginable devastation. The north wing reduced to rubble, children's voices replaced by cries of pain and the shouts of rescuers. Huyck took charge, organizing frantic efforts to dig through the debris. Parents clawed at the wreckage with bare hands, desperate to find their children. Teachers like Bernice Sterling, who miraculously survived the blast, joined the effort, pulling survivors from the rubble while grappling with the horror of what they had witnessed. Neighbors, farmers, and even strangers who heard the blast converged on the school, forming human chains to move broken bricks and splintered beams, their faces streaked with dust and tears. Amid this chaos, Andrew Kehoe arrived, driving his Ford truck toward the school. To those who saw him, he might have appeared as a concerned neighbor, come to help in the crisis. But Huyck, spotting Kehoe, approached the truck, perhaps hoping for assistance. He had no way of knowing that Kehoe's vehicle was a rolling bomb, packed with dynamite, pyritol, and shrapnel. As Huyck drew near, Kehoe raised a rifle and fired a single shot into the truck's cargo, detonating the explosives in a second, earth-shattering blast. The explosion killed Kehoe instantly, along with Huyck, two bystanders, Postmaster Glenn Smith and retired farmer Nelson McFerrin, and a child, 9-year-old Cleo Clayton, who had survived the first blast only to be caught in the second. The death toll climbed to 44, and a fifth victim, 10-year-old Beatrice Gibbs, would succumb to her injuries later in the hospital, bringing the total to 45. The truck's shrapnel, nails, bolts, and scrap metal rained down on the crowd, injuring dozens more and adding to the carnage. Rescuers, stunned but undeterred, continued their grim work. Bernice Sterling, her hands trembling from shock, helped pull children from the rubble, some miraculously alive, others beyond saving. Farmers like Monty Ellsworth, who later chronicled the disaster, joined the effort, their calloused hands straining against the weight of the debris. The American Red Cross set up aid stations, and doctors from Lansing rushed to the scene, treating the wounded in makeshift triage areas. Parents wandered the site, some clutching their children in relief, others collapsing in grief as they identified small bodies among the ruins. The community, bound by trust and shared purpose, rallied in the face of unimaginable loss, but the weight of the tragedy was crushing. Children like Beatrice Gibbs, who lingered in the hospital before dying, underscored the ongoing toll, while survivors carried scars, both physical and emotional, that would last a lifetime. Investigators soon descended on the scene, piecing together the scope of Kehoe's plan. In the school's south wing, they discovered an additional 500 pounds of undetonated dynamite and pyritol, wired but inactive due to a faulty connection. Had this second cache detonated, The entire school, and much of downtown Bath, might have been leveled, potentially doubling the death toll. The realization sent chills through the community. Kehoe's failure was not a lack of intent, but a stroke of luck. A single wire that spared countless lives. At Kehoe's farm, the devastation was equally revealing. Firefighters and investigators found Nellie's charred remains, her body bludgeoned before the flames consumed her. The barn, reduced to ashes, held the remains of horses, their legs wired to prevent escape. Girdled fruit trees stood as silent witnesses to Kehoe's spite, and scattered lumber fueled the blaze that erased his property. Amid the ruins, a stenciled sign offered a glimpse into his mind. Criminals are made, not born. To Kehoe, this was his manifesto, a declaration that his actions were the fault of a community he believed had wronged him. Through taxes, rejection, and the pressures that had unraveled his life. The nation's press descended on Bath, their headlines screaming of a madman and fiend. Reporters from Chicago, Detroit, and New York crowded the small town, interviewing survivors and photographing the wreckage. Thousands of visitors clogged the roads, some to mourn, others drawn by morbid curiosity. For a brief moment, the Bath school disaster was a national tragedy, a story of incomprehensible evil in a place where such things seemed impossible. Yet, just days later, on May 20th, Charles Lindbergh completed his historic transatlantic flight, landing in Paris to global acclaim. The nation's attention shifted, and Bath's story began to fade. Newspapers moved on, and the disaster, lacking the sustained media frenzy of modern tragedies, slipped into obscurity. By the end of May, Bath Township was left to grieve alone, its pain overshadowed by a world eager to celebrate a hero. The aftermath revealed the depth of Kehoe's planning and the community's blindness. His months of preparation, buying explosives in small batches, wiring the school's basement under the guise of maintenance, went unnoticed because no one suspected a neighbor could harbor such malice. His role as school board treasurer and handyman gave him unchecked access, turning trust into a weapon. The undetonated explosives in the south wing underscored the scale of his ambition, while the sign at his farm hinted at his twisted rationale. For Bath, the disaster was a betrayal of everything the community held dear: trust, progress, the sanctity of its children. As rescuers like Bernice Sterling continued their work, saving dozens but haunted by those they could not, the town faced a new reality. The unthinkable had happened, and no one had seen it coming. The Bath School disaster is not merely a chronicle of destruction, but a tapestry of human lives, each thread revealing the complexities of trust, betrayal, and loss. At its dark heart stands Andrew Philip Kehoe, a man of stark contradictions whose actions on May 18, 1927, shattered a community. Kehoe was a skilled electrician, capable of wiring a school for illumination or annihilation, a neighbor who lent a hand with chores yet harbored grudges that festered into deadly intent. His intelligence and mechanical prowess made him a respected figure in Bath Township, yet his rage, fueled by a head injury, financial ruin, and a humiliating election loss, transformed him into a monster. His final act, stenciling "Criminals are made, not born," on a sign at his ruined farm, suggests he saw himself not as a villain but as a victim, pushed to extremes by a community he believed had betrayed him. Was his motive a simple matter of taxes and rejection? Or did a deeper darkness drive him? The question lingers, answered only by the devastation he left behind, a puzzle that invites us to probe the boundaries of human nature. Kehoe's life began in 1872 in Tecumseh, Michigan, where he was born into a family of 13 children, raised on the hardscrabble realities of farm life. His intelligence set him apart early on, leading him to Michigan State College to study electrical engineering, a rare pursuit for a farmer's son in the late 19th century. In St. Louis, he worked as an electrician, mastering the craft that would later become his weapon. Neighbors in Bath, where he settled in 1919, admired his ability to fix anything mechanical, from tractors to household wiring. He was meticulous, sanding and oiling tools to extend their life, a man who valued precision in all things. Yet, this same precision turned sinister as he wired over 500 pounds of dynamite beneath the Bath Consolidated School. His neighbors saw a helpful, if eccentric, figure. They missed the rage simmering beneath. A head injury in his 20s, which left him comatose for weeks, marked a turning point. Once charming, he became irritable, his temper flaring over minor slights. One neighbor recalled him beating a horse to death for laziness, a chilling glimpse of his capacity for violence. Whispers also tied him to his stepmother's 1911 death in a suspicious fire, though no evidence pinned him to the crime. These incidents, scattered across decades, suggest a man whose volatility was always present, waiting for the right conditions to erupt. By 1927, those conditions had arrived. Kehoe's 185-acre farm faced foreclosure, a crushing blow to a man who prided himself on self-reliance. His wife Nellie's chronic illness, likely tuberculosis, drained their savings with medical bills, adding strain to an already fractious marriage. Elected school board treasurer in 1924, Kehoe clashed with Superintendent Emery Huyck over the property taxes that funded the Bath Consolidated School. Taxes he blamed for his financial woes. His 1926 bid for township clerk ended in defeat, a public humiliation that deepened his resentment. In his mind, these setbacks were not personal failures, but injustices inflicted by a community that had turned against him. The sign he left behind, "Criminals are made, not born," reveals a chilling mindset. Kehoe saw himself as a product of external forces, a man driven to murder by a world that had wronged him. Was it the taxes, the election loss, or the lingering effects of his head injury that pushed him to plant dynamite beneath a school filled with children? The answer, as Arnie Bernstein suggests in Bath Massacre, may lie in Kehoe's identity as an injustice collector, a man who hoarded grievances until they exploded in catastrophic violence. His actions, murdering his wife, destroying his farm, and targeting the school, offer the only resolution to this question, a grim testament to a mind consumed by vengeance. Nellie Kehoe, his wife, emerges as a tragic shadow in this story, a figure whose suffering underscores the depth of Kehoe's cruelty. Born into a respected Michigan family, Nellie married Kehoe in 1912, settling into a life that promised stability, but delivered hardship. Her chronic illness, likely tuberculosis, confined her to periods of bed rest and costly treatments, straining their marriage and finances. Little is known of her inner life. Contemporary accounts are sparse, and she left no diaries or letters, but her death speaks volumes. Sometime between May 16th and 18th, 1927, Kehoe bludgeoned her, leaving her body to burn in the firebombs he set to destroy their farm. The brutality of her murder, coupled with the destruction of their home, reveals a man who spared no one in his quest for retribution. Nellie's story, though fleeting, is a poignant reminder of the personal toll of Kehoe's rage, a life extinguished before the larger tragedy unfolded. What did she know of his plans? Did she sense the darkness growing in her husband? These questions, unanswerable, deepen the tragedy of her loss, a woman caught in the orbit of a man unraveling. Superintendent Emery Huyck stands as a counterpoint to Kehoe, a principled leader whose courage defined his legacy. At 33, Huyck was a World War I veteran, a man of discipline and dedication who saw the Bath Consolidated School as a beacon of progress. As superintendent, he championed its mission to provide a modern education, even as he faced Kehoe's relentless criticism on the school board. Kehoe accused Huyck of mismanagement, targeting him as a symbol of the community's betrayal. Huyck's refusal to bow to Kehoe's bullying made him a target, yet he remained steadfast, a man committed to his students and their future. On May 18th, as the school's north wing exploded, Huyck rushed to the scene, organizing rescuers to dig through the rubble. His bravery was cut short when Kehoe detonated his truck, killing Huyck in the second blast. His death, alongside 44 others, underscores the cost of standing up to a man consumed by rage. Huyck's legacy, though marred by tragedy, lies in his selflessness, a leader who gave his life trying to save others. Teachers like Bernice Sterling, who survived the blast, carry the weight of the disaster's aftermath. A second-grade teacher, Sterling was in her classroom when the explosion rocked the school. Miraculously unharmed, she joined the frantic rescue efforts, pulling children from the rubble while grappling with the horror of what she had witnessed. The trauma lingered, shaping her life as she continued teaching in Ann Arbor until her death in 1973. In interviews decades later, Sterling spoke of the day with a quiet resolve, her voice trembling as she recalled the children she couldn't save. Her story is one of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, yet also a reminder of the scars that never fully heal. Other teachers, like Hazel Weatherby, died in the blast, their names etched in the community's memory, as heroes who shielded their students until the end. The children, 38 of them aged 7 to 12, represent the heart of the tragedy, their innocence stolen in an instant. F. Robert Cochran and J. Emerson Medcoff, both 8, were among the victims, their desks buried under the collapsed north wing. Their names, alongside others like Beatrice Gibbs, who died later in the hospital, evoke the futures that were lost, dreams of growing up, of becoming farmers, teachers, or adventurers. Survivors, interviewed by NPR in 2009, recalled classmates who never returned, their absence a permanent wound in the community's fabric. These children, full of promise, were Kehoe's ultimate targets, a choice that defies comprehension. Their loss raises the question, how could a man who saw these children daily, who walked past their playground, choose to destroy them? The fourth answer, rooted in Kehoe's distorted perception of victimhood, only deepens the tragedy. The community itself is a character in this story, a collective bound by trust, hard work, and shared dreams, yet blindsided by one of its own. Bath Township was a place where neighbors helped neighbors, where farmers like Monty Ellsworth lent tools or shared harvests. Ellsworth, who later wrote The Bath School Disaster, noted Kehoe's quirks, his obsession with order, his complaints about taxes, but never imagined his capacity for evil. The school, meant to uplift the community, became Kehoe's target, exposing the ethical dilemma of trusting those in power. Kehoe's role as school board treasurer and handyman gave him unchecked access, turning the community's faith into a vulnerability. How could Bath miss the signs? The answer lies in the strength of its trust, a belief that no neighbor could harbor such malice. Kehoe's secrecy, buying dynamite in small batches, wiring the school under the guise of maintenance, exploited this trust, revealing the fragility of a community unprepared for betrayal. The Bath School disaster forces us to confront the human cost of secrecy and the limits of trust. Kehoe's contradictions, his skill and his rage, his helpfulness and his hatred, make him a figure both familiar and alien. Nellie's tragedy, Huick's heroism, Sterling's resilience, and the children's innocence weave a narrative of loss and endurance. The community's blindness, rooted in its faith, underscores the ethical question. How do we balance trust with vigilance? These stories, woven together, answer the lingering question of Kehoe's motives. Taxes, rejection, and a deeper darkness drove him. But they also challenge us to look closer at those around us, to see the signs we might otherwise miss. The Bath School disaster of May 18, 1927, left Bath Township, Michigan, a community of fewer than 300 souls, grappling with a wound that would never fully heal. The immediate aftermath was a blur of grief, resilience, and disbelief. The Bath Consolidated School, once a proud symbol of progress, lay in ruins, its north wing reduced to rubble by Andrew Kehoe's dynamite, claiming 38 children and 6 adults in the initial blast. A second explosion, triggered by Kehoe's suicide in his shrapnel-laden truck, raised the death toll to 44, with 10-year-old Beatrice Gibbs succumbing to injuries later, bringing the total to 45. At least 58 others were injured, some maimed, for life. Yet in the face of this unimaginable loss, Bath Township rallied. Rescuers, including teachers like Bernice Sterling and neighbors like Monty Ellsworth, dug through debris with bare hands, saving dozens of survivors. The American Red Cross set up aid stations, and doctors from nearby Lansing treated the wounded in makeshift triage areas. By 1928, the community had rebuilt, erecting a new school on the same site, a testament to its determination to move forward. But the scars, emotional, psychological, and social, remained, reshaping Bath into a place forever marked by the unthinkable. The rebuilding of the school was both a practical necessity and a symbolic act. The new Bath Consolidated School, funded partly by state aid and community donations, opened its doors to students within a year. its brick walls a deliberate echo of the original, as if to reclaim what Kehoe had destroyed. Classrooms once again filled with the sounds of lessons and laughter, but the atmosphere was different. Survivors, like those interviewed by NPR in 2009, spoke of a community irrevocably changed. Parents walked their children to school with a new wariness, their eyes scanning for dangers that once seemed impossible. Children, some of whom had lost siblings or friends, played under the shadow of memory, their games quieter, their trust in the world shaken. Teachers like Bernice Sterling, who continued teaching in Ann Arbor until 1973, carried the trauma of that day, their lessons tinged with the weight of survival. One survivor, interviewed decades later, recalled how the community looked after one another differently after the disaster, a subtle shift in the social fabric. Neighbors, once bound by unspoken trust, now carried a collective unease, a recognition that the unthinkable could happen, even in a place as small and familiar as Bath. The disaster prompted no major policy changes, a striking contrast to modern responses to school violence. In 1927, dynamite and pyritol were as common as plows in rural America, essential for clearing stumps, blasting ditches, or breaking up rocky soil. Kehoe's ability to amass over 1,000 pounds of explosives, 500 detonated, 500 spared by a faulty wire, raised fleeting questions about access, but no legislation followed. Rural communities relied on dynamite for survival, and restricting it seemed impractical, even unthinkable. Instead, the disaster sparked deeper, more introspective questions about secrecy and vigilance. Could Kehoe's anger have been spotted? His neighbors had noted his quirks, his obsession with order, his cryptic complaints about taxes, but in a community built on trust, these were dismissed as eccentricities, not warning signs. Should his access to explosives have been questioned? As a respected electrician and school board treasurer, Kehoe's purchases in small, spaced-out batches drew no suspicion. His role as a handyman gave him unfettered access to the school's basement, where he wired his deadly trap under the guise of routine maintenance. These answers, woven through the narrative, reveal a community grappling with the limits of trust, forced to confront the reality that a neighbor could hide such malice behind a familiar face. The ethical questions raised by the disaster resonate beyond 1927. Kehoe's secrecy exploited Bath's faith in its own, highlighting the delicate balance between trust and vigilance. Could the community have intervened? His head injury in his 20s, which left him comatose and altered his personality, was known but not scrutinized in an era with limited understanding of brain trauma. His financial ruin, tied to falling crop prices and Nellie's medical bills, was a private struggle, shared by many farmers but never openly discussed. His election loss for township clerk in 1926, a public humiliation, was a grievance he nursed in silence. These were fragments of a larger picture, but in a tight-knit community, no one connected the dots. The disaster exposed the vulnerability of trust, a lesson that echoes in modern debates about school safety and mental health. How do we spot the warning signs of rage before it erupts? How do we balance openness with caution? Bath's story offers no easy answers, but it forces us to confront the cost of complacency, the price of assuming those we know are incapable of evil. The disaster's obscurity is one of its most perplexing aspects, answering the Hook's question of why it faded from history. In the days following May 18, 1927, newspapers across the nation descended on Bath, their headlines screaming of a madman and fiend. Reporters from Chicago, Detroit, and New York crowded the small town, interviewing survivors and photographing the wreckage. Thousands of visitors clogged the roads, some to mourn, others drawn by morbid curiosity. For a brief moment, the Bath school disaster was a national tragedy, a story of incomprehensible evil in a place where such things seemed impossible. Yet, on May 20th, just 2 days later, Charles Lindbergh completed his historic transatlantic flight, landing in Paris to global acclaim. The nation's attention shifted overnight, and Bath's story began to fade. By the end of May, the disaster was no longer front-page news, its coverage drowned out by Lindbergh's triumph and the relentless march of other stories. Unlike modern tragedies like Columbine or Sandy Hook, which are amplified by 24-hour news cycles and social media, the Bath school disaster lacked the cultural scaffolding to endure. The media of 1927, limited to print and early radio, moved on quickly, and the public followed, eager to celebrate a hero rather than dwell on a horror. The absence of a clear narrative further contributed to the disaster's erasure. Kehoe's motives, financial ruin, resentment over taxes, a lost election, and perhaps the lingering effects of his head injury, seemed too mundane to explain the slaughter of 38 children. His sign, "Criminals are made, not born," suggested a man who saw himself as a victim, but it offered no satisfying why to a public seeking answers. Modern tragedies often gain traction through clear narratives, ideology, mental illness, or societal failure. But Bath's story resisted such simplicity. The lack of a sustained media frenzy, coupled with the nation's desire to move past an uncomfortable truth, relegated the disaster to obscurity. By the 1930s, it was rarely mentioned outside Bath, and even there, survivors spoke of it in hushed tones, as if to avoid reopening old wounds. A modest museum, established in the 1970s, and a small park with memorials kept the memory alive locally. But nationally, the disaster became a footnote, overshadowed by events that fit more neatly into history's narrative. Yet, the Bath School disaster proves that school violence is not a modern phenomenon, challenging the assumption that such horrors are unique to our time. Long before Columbine or Sandy Hook, Kehoe demonstrated that a single individual, armed not with guns but with dynamite and determination, could devastate a community. This realization, drawn from the narrative, answers the Hook's questions about how Kehoe orchestrated his massacre and what drove him. His electrical skill and role as school board treasurer gave him the means and access to wire the school's basement with explosives, his work disguised as routine maintenance. His motives blended financial ruin, rejection, and a deep-seated rage, amplified by his belief that the community had wronged him. The disaster's obscurity, as noted, stems from its timing, eclipsed by Lindbergh's flight, and the lack of a clear, compelling why that could anchor it in public consciousness. These answers, while resolving the Hook's questions, raise new ones. Why do some tragedies endure while others fade? How do we learn from a past we barely remember? The impact of the Bath School disaster extends beyond its immediate aftermath, offering lessons that resonate nearly a century later. It challenges us to learn from history, to recognize that school violence in any form is a recurring tragedy that demands vigilance. The community's resilience, rebuilding the school, supporting survivors, and honoring the lost, speaks to the human capacity to endure, but its blindness to Kehoe's rage underscores the need for awareness. Modern parallels are striking. Debates about mental health, access to weapons, and community trust echo the questions Bath faced. Could Kehoe's anger have been spotted? Perhaps, if someone had probed his cryptic complaints or noticed his frequent trips to the school's basement. Should his access to explosives have been questioned? In hindsight, yes, but in 1927, dynamite was a tool, not a threat. These lessons, drawn from the narrative, highlight the importance of questioning assumptions, of looking closer at those we trust, and of remembering tragedies that might otherwise be forgotten. Bath's story, though faded, is a call to action. It urges us to honor the memory of the 45 lives lost, children like F. Robert Cochran and J. Emerson Medcoff, teachers like Hazel Weatherby and leaders like Emery Hike. By learning from their tragedy, it challenges us to confront the ethical dilemmas of trust and secrecy, to ask how we can prevent the next Kehoe before he acts. The disaster's obscurity, while a product of its time, reminds us that history's lessons are only valuable if we keep them alive. At Secrets Unleashed, we bring these stories to light, ensuring that Bath's pain and its lessons are not forgotten. The Bath School disaster answers the Hook's questions: how Kehoe did it, why he did it, and why it was forgotten. But it leaves us with a challenge: to remember, to reflect, and to act, so that the past can guide us toward a safer future. The Bath School disaster, which unfolded on May 18, 1927, in a small Michigan township, answers the chilling questions posed at the outset of our story. How could a man orchestrate such a devastating act without firing a bullet? What drove him to destroy the heart of his community? And why has this catastrophe faded from history's pages? Andrew Kehoe, a farmer, electrician, and school board treasurer, used his technical expertise and unfettered access to the Bath Consolidated School to wire over 500 pounds of dynamite beneath its classrooms, killing 38 children and 6 adults in a meticulously planned act of vengeance. His motives, a toxic blend of financial ruin, public rejection, and a festering belief that the community had wronged him, were distilled into a single, haunting phrase stenciled on a sign at his ruined farm. Criminals are made, not born. The tragedy's obscurity, overshadowed by Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight days later, reflects the fleeting nature of 1920s media and the lack of a clear narrative to anchor it in public memory. Yet, the Bath School disaster is more than a forgotten chapter. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of trust, the dangers of secrecy, and the enduring need to learn from the past. At Secrets Unleashed, we unearth these stories weekly, peeling back the layers of history to reveal the human truths beneath. The Bath School disaster challenges us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do we spot hidden threats in those we trust? What does this tragedy teach us about trust, memory, and vigilance? And how do we ensure that the forgotten are remembered? The answers to our Hook's questions are both illuminating and unsettling. Kehoe's ability to execute his plan stemmed from his electrical skills and his role as a trusted school board member, which granted him access to the school's basement, where he wired explosives under the guise of maintenance. His purchases of dynamite and pyritol, common tools in rural America, went unnoticed because he acquired them in small, unremarkable batches. His motives, as revealed through the narrative, were rooted in a confluence of personal and societal pressures. The foreclosure of his farm, his wife Nellie's costly illness, a humiliating election loss, and his resentment over property taxes that funded the school. These grievances, magnified by a possible head injury from his 20s that altered his personality, fueled a rage that he directed at the community's most vulnerable, its children. The disaster's fading from history, as we've explored, was a product of timing, eclipsed by Lindbergh's flight on May 20th, 1927, and the absence of a compelling why that could sustain public attention. Unlike modern tragedies amplified by 24-hour news cycles, Bath's story lacked the media infrastructure to endure, leaving it to fade into obscurity, remembered only by those who lived through it and a handful of historians. Yet, the Bath School disaster is not just a story of loss. It is a mirror reflecting our own struggles with safety, trust, and memory. Kehoe's secrecy, enabled by the community's faith in him, underscores a timeless ethical dilemma. How do we balance trust with vigilance? Bath Township was a place where neighbors helped neighbors, where a man like Kehoe, known for fixing tractors and wiring barns, was seen as a pillar, not a threat. His quirks, his obsession with order, his complaints about taxes, were dismissed as eccentricities, not warning signs. Could Bath have stopped him? Survivors reflecting decades later in interviews like those with NPR in 2009 grappled with this question. Kehoe's head injury, financial struggles, and election loss were known. But in a community bound by trust, no one connected these dots to imagine a plan so monstrous. His access to explosives, unremarkable in an era when dynamite was a farmer's tool, went unquestioned. These failures, though rooted in the context of 1927, resonate today as we debate how to identify threats before they erupt. The disaster teaches us that trust, while a community's strength, can also be its vulnerability, urging us to look closer at those we assume we know. The tragedy's lessons extend to modern debates on school safety and mental health. The Bath School disaster proves that school violence is not a new phenomenon, predating Columbine or Sandy Hook by decades. Kehoe's use of dynamite rather than firearms challenges the assumption that such acts require guns, broadening our understanding of how rage can find a weapon. His story raises questions about mental health, particularly the impact of his head injury, which may have altered his behavior in ways unrecognized in the 1920s. Today, we have better tools to understand brain trauma and psychological distress. But the challenge remains: how do we spot the warning signs of rage before it turns deadly? Schools now employ counselors, threat assessments, and security measures. But Bath reminds us that no system is foolproof, especially when the perpetrator is a trusted insider. The disaster also prompts us to consider access, not just to weapons, but to spaces like the school's basement, where Kehoe worked undisturbed. These questions, unanswered in 1927, demand our attention now as we strive to prevent the next tragedy. The obscurity of the Bath School disaster is a lesson in itself, revealing how history chooses which stories to remember. The timing of Lindbergh's flight, a moment of triumph that captivated the world, pushed Bath's tragedy off the front pages within days. The media of the time, limited to newspapers and early radio, lacked the relentless coverage of today's news cycle, allowing the story to fade. Kehoe's motives, tax disputes, personal grudges, financial ruin, seemed too mundane to explain the slaughter of 38 children, leaving a narrative void that resisted public fixation. Unlike modern tragedies, which are dissected endlessly on social media and cable news, Bath's story lacked a cultural framework to sustain it. This erasure raises a deeper question. How do we remember the forgotten? The community of Bath kept the memory alive through small acts. A museum established in the 1970s, a park with memorials bearing the names of the lost. But nationally, the disaster remains a footnote. At Secrets Unleashed, we believe that remembering these stories is an act of responsibility, a way to honor the 45 lives lost and ensure their lessons endure. By sharing Bath's story, we amplify the voices of victims like F. Robert Cochran, J. Emerson Medcoff, and Beatrice Gibbs, whose futures were stolen, and heroes like Emery Huick, who died trying to save others. The human stories at the heart of the disaster are what make it so compelling. Kehoe, a man of contradictions, was both a skilled electrician and a mass murderer, a neighbor who helped with chores yet planned destruction. Nellie Kehoe, his wife, was a tragic figure, her illness and brutal murder a prelude to the larger horror. Superintendent Emery Huick, a principled leader, stood up to Kehoe's bullying and paid with his life, his bravery in the rescue effort defining his legacy. Teachers like Bernice Sterling, who survived but carried the trauma for decades, embody resilience in the face of loss. The children, 38 of them, represent the innocence that Kehoe targeted, their names etched in Bath's memory as a reminder of what was lost. The community itself, trusting and hardworking, was blindsided by one of its own, forcing us to question how such evil can hide in plain sight. These stories, woven together, answer the Hook's questions but leave us with new ones. Could Bath have seen the signs? Could anyone have stopped Kehoe before he acted? These are not just historical queries but challenges for today, urging us to look closer at our own communities. At Secrets Unleashed, we uncover these forgotten stories every week, bringing you narratives that provoke, unsettle, and inspire. The Bath School disaster is a call to reflect on trust, vigilance, and memory. How do we spot hidden threats in those we know? Kehoe's secrecy thrived because no one suspected a neighbor could harbor such malice. What does Bath teach us about trust and memory? It reminds us that trust is a double-edged sword, essential for community but vulnerable to betrayal, and that memory requires effort to preserve. We invite you to join us in this mission. Subscribe to Secrets Unleashed on YouTube for more tales that dig deep into the past, challenging you to think critically about the present. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Could Bath have stopped Kehoe? What steps might have made a difference? Greater scrutiny of his behavior? Restricted access to explosives, or a community more attuned to his grievances? How do we ensure that tragedies like Bath are remembered, not forgotten? Spread this story with others, because the past only speaks when we amplify its voice. By sharing, you honor the memory of the 45 lives lost and help ensure that their lessons shape a safer future. The Bath School disaster is a haunting reminder that evil can wear a familiar face, that trust can blind us to danger, and that history's lessons are only as powerful as our willingness to heed them. It challenges us to ask hard questions. How do we balance trust with caution in our communities? How do we recognize the warning, signs of rage before it explodes? And how do we keep the memory of tragedies alive so their lessons endure? These questions, rooted in Bath's pain, are as urgent today as they were in 1927. As we close this chapter, we leave you with a challenge: to look closer, to listen harder, to act before resentment festers into catastrophe. At Secrets Unleashed, we'll continue to unearth these stories week after week, inviting you to join us in seeking the secrets that shape our world. Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and keep the past alive. Because only by remembering can we hope to learn